Hey guys, one more time, just trying to get some explanations and things that you might need after doing the reading assignment. Today we're going to talk about the Fifth Amendment. Specifically, we're going to talk about due process rights that begin in the Fifth Amendment. We're not going to be talking about the whole Fifth Amendment because we're going to take a section of it on eminent domain and turn it into its own video. But this is also the beginning of your fair trial rights, so we'll be getting into that a little bit today. Your reading assignment had Sixth Amendment in it as well, and that's obviously the heavy lifting of fair trial. We'll get into that in another video. Your criminal rights in general, the rights of the accused, we generally talk about 5, 6, and 8. However, a lot of people will talk about Fourth because Fourth Amendment privacy, of course, gets into what can the police do, what can they not do when you are being investigated for a crime. But today, Fifth Amendment. So here's your Fifth Amendment. You can see, just like all your other amendments, it is a package of rights, starting with grand jury, double jeopardy, self-incrimination protection. In general, we talk about due process of law, basically being protected from having your life, your freedom, or your money and property and things like that taken from you without your day in court. And then specifically, it mentions private property being taken. That's eminent domain. Kelo versus New London, some ideas that we've already talked a little bit about in class that we'll either address in another video or by a reading assignment. So the first one to talk about is grand jury. Grand jury is essentially different than a regular jury. We're not talking about deciding if somebody is guilty or innocent or not. We're simply going to decide if there's enough evidence for an indictment. And an indictment would then be basically a formal accusation of a crime. Essentially, we're investigating you for murder, and now we think maybe there's enough evidence to put you on trial for murder. So we're going to formally accuse you of murder if there's enough evidence. Now, the grand jury is going to look at the evidence. They're going to decide, all right, we're not trying to decide if you did it or not. We're just trying to decide, is there enough evidence for us to go to a trial in order to decide if you did it or not. And so that process, that formal charge, is an indictment. That's what the grand jury does. Now, how does a grand jury protect you? Why would it be in the Fifth Amendment, or why would it be in the Bill of Rights? Well, consider that the government, without the grand jury protection, could basically threaten you with a trial for something that they just made up. Hey, we think you're guilty of murder, but wait a second, there's no way, there's no evidence of murder. It's like, well, don't worry about it. The trial's going to clear that up. In the meantime, your life is disrupted, and you basically have to put your whole existence on hold. And while you wait for your jury trial to determine what you already knew, which is that you're innocent. Well, the government could do that. Now, I want you to imagine Sam Adams. He's a troublemaker, and he's kind of a pain in the butt for the British government. And then I want you to imagine Sam Adams basically being accused of a crime that he didn't do and having to go to trial, in order to defend himself. And while he's dealing with the fact that he might go to jail for murder and has to go to this trial and prepare for a crime that he knows he didn't commit, he's not causing trouble for the British government. And so if the British government wanted to suppress the American revolutionaries, one of the ways they could do it is by simply these false accusations. Well, a grand jury is your protection against a false accusation. In other words, they will not produce an indictment, a charge of a crime, until there's evidence that makes us wonder if you committed a crime. So this is a very big protection against major crimes. The second thing in this Fifth Amendment is the double jeopardy protection. Pretty good movie, was made about it a couple years ago. Basically saying that you can't be charged twice for the same crime. Obviously, it protects you from the government. Basically, whoa, little mistake there. Sorry about that. It basically protects you from the government just basically saying, hey, you're charged with murder. It's like, okay, a trial found me innocent. Okay, we're just going to do it again. Okay, another trial found me innocent. Okay, we're going to do it again. Basically doing it again and again and again until they get the results they want. Now imagine, go back to my Sam Adams. So Sam Adams is a troublemaker for the British government during the Revolution, and we're going to charge you with a crime. And then a jury finds you innocent, and okay, no big deal, we'll put you on trial again. And so we just keep doing this until either one, we get Sam Adams locked up for a crime that he may or may not have committed, that multiple trials said he didn't commit, but we finally got one to agree with us, or two, you just have to go through that trial process over and over and over again until essentially your life is ruined, or at the very least you've been put out of commission for trying to cause trouble to the British government. Now, there are circumstances. Remember, all of our rights are limited by, in some way. Your First Amendment rights, we talked about a lot. Your Second Amendment rights, we talked about in the last unit. So how are your double jeopardy rights limited? Well, we are going to allow for a second trial or more, against double jeopardy protections if there's new evidence against you. So if there's significant new evidence that suggests that, hey, maybe we should do this over, then we will. So, for example, O.J. Simpson, a couple years ago, he's found not guilty of murder for Nicole Brown Simpson. And then a couple of years ago, they thought they found, during a construction project next door to O.J.'s old house, they thought they found the knife that was used to kill Nicole Brown Simpson. Well, if that knife can be somehow connected to evidence that O.J. had it in his possession, then that would be new evidence. The missing knife was a problem for the prosecution. And if there's the knife and it's got O.J.'s fingerprints all over it or something like that, well, okay, maybe we should have a new trial. Now, it didn't turn out to be that. It wasn't the knife that was used, and so that wasn't the case. But if it had been, there might have been a new trial. O.J. might have been put on trial again for that crime. That would have been a limitation to his double jeopardy rights. One of the most famous ones that people know from the Fifth Amendment is the self-incrimination protection. In fact, it even says, we even talk about pleading the fifth. The fifth, in this case, is the Fifth Amendment. And basically it says you don't have to be compelled in a criminal case to be a witness against yourself. In other words, you don't have to be your own worst enemy in court. We can't force you to testify. Now, a lot of court cases in American history dealing with circumstances that amount to torture or a confession in some way that was done in ways that were forcing you to, torturing you or leaving you in isolation for 48 hours without water or something silly like that. That I finally agreed to what they wanted me to agree to just so I could get out of this situation. Those would fall under Fifth Amendment protections. But most people look at the Fifth Amendment protections as the right to remain silent. Essentially, I don't have to say that. I don't have to answer that question. I don't have to testify in court. I don't have to say anything. That's your job as far as the prosecution, the police. That's your job, not my job to be my own worst enemy. Now, the self-incrimination protection does get a little more complicated. So what kinds of things are limits on self-incrimination? Now, obviously, I don't have to testify. I can't be compelled to answer your questions. I have the right to remain silent. However, what about, say, my height? So let's say we're in court and the prosecutor says the perpetrator of the crime was 5'6", and can the accused please stand up so we can find how tall he is, or can how tall is the accused? Would me standing up, or would me having to say I'm 5'6", would that be a violation of the Fifth Amendment? I mean, I don't have to say those things, right? Well, in this case, we're going to limit it. We're going to say, well, 5'6", being 5'6", that's a physical characteristic, and that's something that we can all kind of see. And because we can all see it, because it's physical characteristic, outward characteristic, then that means that it's not me telling you something that, that I've got locked up in my head. It's me simply, being looked at to say, oh, hey, you're 5'6", just like the guy who committed the crime. We've all seen these kinds of things, at convenience stores and such, so that if robbed, the clerk can look as you run out the door and say, hey, the guy who robbed me was 5'6". And that would be a physical characteristic. That is not protected by your Fifth Amendment. Now, this raises some really interesting questions about, is a genetic code, is that part of your physical characteristic? And specifically, more for you guys, it raises this kind of interesting dilemma with our phones and things. So, for example, most of us use an iPhone or something like that uses a fingerprint that says, to unlock our phone, and then the information in our phone is available to whoever has unlocked it. Well, my fingerprint could be considered a physical characteristic. In other words, I could say, the police could say, please unlock your phone. And I would say, no, the code is something that, is private and I don't have to be my own worst enemy. Well, courts could say, well, no, but you have your phone locked with a fingerprint, and your fingerprint is a physical characteristic. Well, this would be opposed to me entering a code. Now, this is actually locked in my head. And so I don't have to give you that code. It's me telling you something that is going to hurt me in court. And therefore, I don't have to tell you what my code is. You need to break into my phone. You need to hack it or whatever in order to get it. And with a big, long 6-digit code, especially if you have letters as well as numbers, that might take forever for a computer to do that. So that would be me pleading the Fifth. No, I'm not going to give you the code to my phone. However, if I use a fingerprint, now it's a physical characteristic, and with a warrant, or we can force you to open your phone and then find out what's on it. So, kind of an interesting modern day tech dilemmas about pleading the Fifth. I'm running out of time, so before I finish, let's talk about where most of us know about pleading the Fifth comes from. It's from something we call our Miranda rights. It comes from a court case, Miranda versus Arizona, in which basically a guy wound up being his own worst enemy, testifying in front of himself or against himself, and and collecting all kinds of the police collected all kinds of evidence against him. And the idea was, he didn't realize that he didn't have to do that. So now the police have to give you these Miranda rights. Number one, you have the right to remain silent. That is your Fifth Amendment right there. The other ones, well, this is kind of an extension. Just, hey, do you realize that if you say something, it's going to be used? Kind of Fifth Amendment there. The other ones deal with a lot of like Sixth Amendment rights. So this is your lawyer, Sixth Amendment trial rights, and things like that. But the first two deal with your Fifth Amendment rights. So they're basically trying to say, look, we understand that, government class was a long time ago, and probably the last thing you're thinking about if you're under arrest. So during those kinds of stressful situations, we should probably remind you that the Fifth Amendment does protect you from these kinds of things. And we're going to do this before we're in what's called custodial interrogation, which means essentially you can't leave, you're in custody, and you're being questioned. Both of these things have to happen, so the police don't have to do it right away, although they often do because they're trying to just make sure they don't forget. But unless you're in custody, in other words, you can't leave, they don't have to tell you. It's like, hey, can you answer some questions for us? Well, sure. Well, if you could walk away, I'm not under arrest, well, then your Miranda rights are not necessarily, they don't have to be given. Secondarily, we can arrest you, but as long as we're not asking you questions, we don't have to give you Miranda rights. Now, as soon as we start asking you questions, then we need to make sure we give you Miranda rights in order to remind you about your right to remain silent. So that's going to be it for today. Next class period. Nice. I wish. Next video, we're going to talk about due process in general and abortion finally. And I will try not to start some sort of like internet flame war. So until then, stay healthy. Good luck. Talk to you then.